How's the lighting? I got another new tumbler. Spooky Sunday dinners, spooky Sunday dinners, spooky Sunday dinners. Still can't afford a theme song. Hey guys, for those of you that don't know, my name is Johnny Taylor, and this is Spooky Sunday Dinners, where every Sunday, every other Sunday, when I'm late, Monday, at this point, whenever, we talk about a true crime case that I just really want to talk about while we make a fairly easy recipe. So, if true crime, cooking, and dark humor is your thing, you might want to hit that subscribe button below. I guess it looks like the every other week thing is going to be what it is for a while, so if you don't like it, get me more views. But anyway, let's get into what we're going to talk about this week, because this week we're doing something a little bit different. And by a little bit different, I'm expecting a cease and desist letter next week. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going for it. And if you know me, you knew that this was coming the whole time. We're here, so let's just do it. This week, we are going to be talking about deaths at Disneyland, specifically visitor deaths at Disneyland, while we make Disneyland churros. So you can see what I'm getting myself into here. All right, we know what we're talking about and what we're making, which can only mean it's Karen disclaimer time. Hey Karen. Karen disclaimer number 1. These are not professional recipes. I don't have the nutritional facts, and they're not really for nutritional value. It's just what I feel like cooking that day. If you make this and you don't like it, or you mess up and get sick, it's not my problem. Again, not professional. Barely scraping mediocre. Karen disclaimer number 2. This is Spooky Sunday Dinners. Emphasis on spooky. We talk about true crime, murder, disease, and all messed up stuff, while we sprinkle a nice little bit of comedy on top, because that's how I cope with being obsessed with something so very dark. If that offends you in any way, shape, or form, it makes you want to pick up a phone to call, text, email, DM, write me a letter to let me know how horrible of a person I am. I know, Karen. It's my personality. You'd think I'd be more used to those by now. As usual, we're going to get into all the ingredients we are going to need. They will always be listed in the description below. This is just so you don't get mad at me. Disclaimer, I've never made this before, and I'm completely going into this recipe blind, so if it fails, you're failing with me. 1 cup of water and 8 tablespoons of butter. 1/4 teaspoon of salt and 1 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour. A 1/2 cup of sugar and 3/4 teaspoon of cinnamon that we're actually going to end up splitting up. 1 1/2 cups of vegetable or canola oil. I'm going in with the cheapest vegetable oil I could find, and 3 eggs. We are also going to need a piping bag, and I went with the cheapest thing I could find at the grocery store, so honestly, you could use a Ziploc bag and it would probably be the same thing. So the first thing we're going to do here is take that water, butter, salt, and 1/4 teaspoon of that cinnamon and throw it in a saucepan over medium heat. We're going to want to bring it to a boil, and let's get into the first death. So our story is going to start in May of 1964 with 15-year-old Mark Maples. He was from Long Beach, California, and was enjoying a day at the park when he decides to have the very bright idea to stand up on one of my all-time favorite rides, the Matterhorn bobsleds. Now, obviously, if you've been to Disneyland, you know that ride is absolutely insane, and if you were to stand up on it, you will get thrown off. So poor 15-year-old Mark gets thrown off, and he actually is kind of at the top of the ride. He gets thrown off and lands on like a track, like a metal beam just under the ride. Like if you've seen the Matterhorn, the tracks kind of go on top of each other. So he falls off of one, lands on the edge of another, an adjacent ledge, if you will, and ended up fracturing his skull and a couple of ribs. He died 3 days later in the hospital. And now we can skip to June of 1966, where we've got a man by the name of Thomas Guy Cleveland. He's a 19-year-old from Northridge, California, and he has this bright idea of like, yo, I'm gonna crash grad night. Can you have some manners? Thank you. For those of you that don't know or are not a huge fan of Disney, grad night is where graduates from that year get to spend all night long in the park. It's packed, it's never fun, but for some reason this guy that is too old to be in high school is like, I'm gonna sneak in, and I'm gonna do that by like jumping on the monorail and walking on the monorail, and then I'm gonna jump into the park. Security guards see him and they're like, yo, get off. There's an oncoming train. You're gonna get hit. He disregards them. He's like, no, I'm gonna make it into there. I'm gonna see my guy Mickey. I'm gonna see Minnie. Maybe he wanted a churro really badly. But anyway, he finally sees the train coming and he jumps down to this like fiberglass canopy under it, but the clearance is not nearly enough, and you know what happens. He gets hit by a monorail and it crushed him and drug him down the track. So now that next summer in August of 1967, we've got 17-year-old Ricky Lee Yama. He's from Hawthorne, California, and decides to not follow the safety instructions on something called the People Mover. And he's like, yo, I'm gonna jump cars, because the People Mover was like separate little cars. And he was like, I'm gonna jump from one to the other as it's going through a tunnel. Well, you can't do that on the People Mover, and 17-year-old Ricky Lee Yama actually fell off and was crushed under the wheels, and his body was dragged literally hundreds of feet, with all other teenage friends having to see it. All right, once we have this mixture at a rolling boil, we are gonna go ahead and reduce it to a simmer and then add in some flour and make it into a dough. So a little trick that I'm going to use is once we have this on a low simmer, I'm going to take our flour and I'm going to use a Danish dough whisk, because we need to stir this vigorously until it is completely combined and make that dough. Once the dough is made, we have to take it off the heat and let it rest for 5 to 7 minutes. Guys, if there's one thing I'm going to tell you to learn from this show, get a Danish dough whisk. It's always linked in my Amazon storefront, and it is literally the best thing ever. I discovered it on TikTok of all things, and just, it's like $9. Just buy it. It looks cool. It looks like you know what you're doing. I've completely removed it from the heat, and this is what we're working with. Don't know if it's right or wrong, but it smells good. So while that dough rests for about 5 to 7 minutes, we can already assess that this story is going really well, Disney. Anyway, this would also be a great time to get that oil heated up in your pan. So now it's June of 1973, and we've got 18-year-old New Yorker Bogdan, and I believe it's pronounced Delaro. I could be totally wrong and completely butchering that. I decided to not pronounce like 3 letters in the name because I thought it would be correct. It could be Delarot, Delarote. I'm not a teacher. I'm not even a chef. But anyway, him and his brother, who's age 10, decide that they're going to stay in the park past closing, right? And they are going to hide out on Tom Sawyer's Island. So once they hide out on Tom Sawyer's Island, they decide that they are going to take a swim across the rivers of America, all the way like back onto the park, I guess. And that's about a 100-foot wide river that they're going to have to swim across. And the 10-year-old brother actually can't swim. So Bogdan puts his brother on his back and swims. They get about halfway, then they decide that they're going to turn around and go back. Unfortunately, that much time in the water and swimming, Bogdan actually drowns. His 10-year-old brother survives and is able to doggy paddle all the way across the extra like 50 feet to the edge, and someone working at the park is able to get him out. Unfortunately, they find his brother's body like by the next morning. And this is a downer, but let's just keep going. So June 7th of 1980, Gerardo Gonzalez is at grad night. and he decides to do the same thing on the People Mover, the same stunt as Lee Yama. But guess what? This time he decides to do it on the quote super speed tunnel. And guess what? The same thing that happened to Ricky happened to Gerardo. Now we can skip to June 4th of 1983, and an 18-year-old Phillip Strohan from Albuquerque, New Mexico, is again at grad night. And Phillip decides that he's actually going to steal a rubber boat from like an employees only area on Tom Sawyer's Island. And he's going to drive the boat. I'm from the desert, just like Phillip. But he's going to take that boat and he's going to take it across the rivers of America again. Now, Phillip, being from the literal desert, has as much boat experience as I do, and that is absolutely none. And I should also mention that he was completely wasted, like grad night wasted. And the boat ends up hitting a rock and flipping over, and we all know what happened there, so yikes. If you couldn't catch on what happened there, he died. Our dough has been sitting for about 7 minutes. Now what we're going to do is stir in those eggs one by one with our same Danish dough whisk. Now, while I stir this dough, this next story is just weird as hell. It is actually the very first Disneyland homicide. Yes, it's true. It's Mickey. He killed Minnie because she was fucking goofy. I'm so sorry. Anyway, what actually happened is that in March of 1981, there's like a private party in Tomorrowland, and 18-year-old Mel Yorba and 28-year-old James O'Driscoll, they get in a fight, right? So James accused Mel of touching his girlfriend and then pulled a knife out and stabbed Mel in the chest. The park medics were apparently like so slow getting there and reacting, and unfortunately Mel was pronounced dead at the hospital. I know, right in front of Donald. A jury did end up awarding Mel's family $600,000 for Disney's negligence. All right, I've got my piping bag folded and ready to put our dough in it. All right, so after I set off the fire alarm and scared everybody in the whole complex, I've got my dough in the piping bag, and somehow I made it work. Now what we're gonna do is take however long strips you want. You wanna make full churros, churro bites. You're gonna push the dough out, and I'm just gonna use scissors to cut it and drop it into the oil. All right, now we're gonna skip a couple years to January of 1984, and we've got Dolly Young, who was a 48-year-old woman from Fremont, California, who was riding the Matterhorn bobsleds. Now, the story that Disney tells goes that Dolly was riding the bobsleds and decided that she was gonna unbuckle her seatbelt, right? And of course, she got thrown out of the bobsleds, and she got thrown onto the track of a different oncoming bobsled. As you know, Disney has like multiple cars on rides going at one time. Her body was crushed by the oncoming bobsled, but funny enough, she was actually the only person in that bobsled at that time, and there is no confirmation if she unbuckled her seatbelt or if the seatbelt malfunctioned. We're just gonna fry these until they're golden brown and then put them on a cooking sheet to do the last of the seasoning with sugar and cinnamon. All right, now we're gonna move on to December 24th of 1998, and a man by the name of Luan Fee Dawson of Duval, Washington, was actually getting in the line when he was struck in the head by a metal cleat that was dislodged from the hull of the sailing ship Columbia. Say that 3 times fast. Now, he was brain dead and pronounced dead 2 days later, and this was, I guess, the first death at Disneyland of a guest that was Disneyland's fault. It wasn't because someone like stood up on the Matterhorn or did some dumb shit, right? And it was because they changed whatever piece of metal that was on the ship was supposed to be held by this like really nice piece of rope, And Disneyland, for budget cuts, ended up changing that piece of rope to like a piece of elastic, which basically like created this kind of like slingshot situation and was gonna take out whoever it hit. It also hit his wife, not as badly, and she was fine from the impact, but the family was awarded $25 million as part of the settlement from Disney. Now, in June of 2000, a 23-year-old visitor from Spain, whose name was not released, was riding the Indiana Jones ride. She stepped off complaining of like a horrible head injury, and it was like later that day or the next day she was hospitalized, and they found out she actually had a brain hemorrhage, and it was caused by like the jostling and crazy like turbulence on that ride. That one's a little bit bumpy. And she ended up dying in September of that year from a brain aneurysm due to those injuries. All right, this is what they're kind of looking like, fried up in the oil. I'm just kind of going by when they get golden brown, stirring them around a little bit and flipping them and pulling them out with a slotted spoon. Now, our last and final one actually happened in September of 2003, and it was 22-year-old Marcelo Torres of Gardenia, California, was riding one of my all-time favorite rides, Big Thunder Mountain. Now, a broken axle lodged in the brakes, causing the train to jump, like it jumped like forward and then stopped, and the back cars actually came and landed on the front cars. It crushed Marcelo and he bled to death, while several other riders were injured. They did determine after an investigation that inadequate maintenance was the cause. All right, while those churros are finishing up frying, I'm gonna add the last of our cinnamon to that sugar we had and make sure it's mixed nice and well, and we're just gonna dunk our already done churros into the mixture and then let them cool just a little bit. All right, this is what our just fried churros look like, and we're gonna go ahead and toss them in our cinnamon sugar mixture. Now, I know that we didn't get into the like cast member maintenance and all of those deaths and injuries, but honestly, if we did, you guys, we would have like a 3-hour show because so many happened. The latest was in 2019, and if you want to know about those, maybe we can do a nice 2-part of Disney cast members, unless, you know, Mickey Mouse breaks into my house tomorrow and kills me for doing this. But I think the #1 thing that we've all learned from this episode, and I think we can all kind of send our strongly worded emails to Disney, is cancel grad night. Get rid of grad night. I know this episode was a bit weird and different and not really like a true crime case, but I thought it was really interesting, and we actually recently went back to Disneyland for the reopening and had a wonderful time, but the whole time I was there, all my spooky brain could think was, wow, I wonder how many people have died here. Alright guys, and here's our first batch of finished churros. As you can tell, this recipe actually makes a lot more, but we're just going to start off with this many and see if they're not completely trash. I also really wanted an excuse to make churros. Alright guys, our finished product, and let's see if they're even good. Honestly, Disneyland quality. This is their recipe, so I would hope so. 10 out of 10, you guys should make these. Alright guys, I really want to know what you guys think about this story. I want to know if there are any more weird theme park deaths you want to do. Want to talk about Universal. What is that one in New Jersey? Like Action Park? Anything like that. Let me know. Be sure to comment below future crimes you want me to cover and recipes you want me to try. Thank you so much for letting me tell you this really, really weird random group of stories and for cooking with me this week. Thank you for watching Spooky Sunday Dinners. I am still singing. I still can't afford a theme song. You guys, Doug doesn't even like churros, so these are actually all mine. You know, all of my neighbors are about to think I'm the coolest person ever. I'm gonna make a churro stand. I got business ideas.